The safe was sitting right there on the sidewalk in the rain, and the officer was smiling. Not a polite smile. The kind of smile a person wears when they already think they've won. Constable Drew Hollis had been on the job for 11 years, and in those 11 years he had learned, or believed he had learned, how to read a situation. He knew, for instance, that a beat-up Silverado parked outside a Tim Hortons at midnight in Sudbury, Ontario, probably meant something. He knew that the man sitting in the driver's seat, quiet, watching him approach in the side mirror, not moving, was the kind of man worth looking at twice. What he didn't know, and wouldn't know for another 47 minutes, was that the man's name was Sébastien Ouellet, and that the small gray safe in the back of that truck contained something that was going to change every assumption Drew Hollis had ever made about himself. But that comes later. First, there was the rain. Sébastien had left Timmins at 9. He'd stopped in Sudbury because the coffee he'd packed in a thermos had gone cold 3 hours back, and his eyes were starting to feel like sandpaper. That was the whole story. That was all there was. He'd pulled in, cut the engine, gone in and gotten a medium double-double and a blueberry muffin. Come back out, sat in the truck for a few minutes, finishing the muffin before starting the drive again. He was 31. He drove a 2014 Silverado that had belonged to his uncle before it belonged to him. The rear passenger window had a small crack in it that he'd been meaning to fix since March. He had 2 Timmy's cups from earlier in the week on the floor of the passenger side. He looked, he knew, like a man who had been driving a long time and wasn't particularly interested in company. He noticed the cruiser pull into the lot maybe 30 seconds after he did. He noticed it the way he always noticed things, quietly, without reaction. He picked up his coffee and took a sip. He watched the cruiser idle to a stop 2 spots over. He waited to see if the officer would get out. The officer got out. Sébastien set the coffee back in the cup holder. He put both hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. He waited. Hollis came around the front of the truck slowly. He had his flashlight up before he even reached the driver's window. He rapped on the glass twice with 2 knuckles, the way someone knocks when they're not really asking. Sébastien rolled it down. "Evening," Hollis said. The flashlight went straight to Sébastien's face, then swept across the cab, the cups, the road atlas wedged between the seat and the center console, the work jacket folded on the passenger seat. "Evening," Sébastien said. "Where are you coming from tonight?" "Timmins." "What were you doing in Timmins?" Sébastien paused. Not long. Just long enough for anyone paying attention to notice that it was a strange question. "I live there," he said. "And where are you headed?" "Ottawa." Hollis's flashlight moved again, back toward the truck bed this time, which he couldn't actually see from where he was standing. "You mind stepping out of the vehicle for me? May I ask the reason for the stop?" Sébastien said. His voice was even. Careful. The voice of a man who has asked this question before and has learned not to let anything slip into it. Hollis smiled. "Not wide. Just enough. Just a routine check. Step out for me, please." The thing about being asked to step out of your vehicle when you've done nothing wrong is that you know, at that moment, that the next hour of your life is not going to belong to you. You know it before the door opens. You feel it in the way the air sits differently outside the truck, colder than it should be, and in the way the officer takes a half step back and watches you like he's expecting something. Sébastien stepped out. He was wearing a gray hoodie, work pants, and a pair of Blundstones that had maybe 2 more winters in them. He stood at the side of his truck and said nothing. Hollis walked around to the back. He put his hands on the tailgate. "You got anything back here I should know about?" "It's a work truck," Sébastien said. "There's gear, tools, a safe." Hollis turned around. For the first time, something in his expression shifted. "A safe. Yes, what kind of safe?" "A lockbox, small, gray. I use it for documents when I'm traveling." Hollis looked at him for a moment, then looked back at the truck bed. He unlatched the tailgate and lowered it. The safe was exactly where Sébastien had said it was. Small, gray. Sitting in the back of the truck next to a canvas bag of tools and a milk crate with some rope and reflective triangles. Nothing else. Hollis looked at it the way a man looks at something he's already decided is suspicious. "I'm going to need you to open that for me." Sébastien's jaw tightened. "Do you have grounds to search the vehicle?" Hollis turned to him fully now. The flashlight was pointed down, but the light from the cruiser was still cutting across the lot in red and blue pulses. Behind them, through the Timmy's window, a teenager behind the counter was pretending not to watch. "My K9 unit indicated on your vehicle," Hollis said. That gives me grounds. Sebastian looked at the police cruiser. There was no second unit. There was no one else in the parking lot. He looked back at Hollis. He said, very quietly, "Your unit indicated." "That's right." Sebastian stood still for a moment. Then he reached into his hoodie pocket, slowly, and produced a set of keys. He walked to the back of the truck. He crouched down and put the key in the lock on the side of the safe. "Take your time," Hollis said from behind him. He said it pleasantly. Sebastian turned the key. What happened next, Hollis would struggle to describe clearly in the weeks that followed. He would try more than once, in different conversations with different people, and each time the sequence of what he saw, and what he understood and what he felt would come out slightly differently, as if his brain was still trying to find an order that made sense. What he saw, a gray lockbox, open, inside on the left side, a folded document in a clear sleeve. A credential wallet, dark blue, a laminated card, federal government issue. A photo ID bearing the name Sebastien Ouellet and the crest of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Special Operations. What he saw on the right side, a service medal, a bar with 2 clasps, and beneath it, lying flat and unmistakable, a Special Operations identification card. Joint Task Force 2. Hollis stood up straight. The flashlight was still in his hand. He didn't say anything. The wind came across the lot and moved a Tim Hortons cup along the pavement somewhere behind them. The red and blue lights kept going. The teenager in the window had given up pretending and was openly staring. Sebastien stood up from his crouch. He didn't look at Hollis. He looked at the safe. Then he looked at the officer. "Is there anything else?" he said. Sebastien Ouellet had grown up in Timmins, the youngest of 4, in a 2-story house on a street that flooded every second spring. His father drove long haul. His mother worked at a pharmacy. He had gone to a high school where guidance counselors told kids to be realistic, where realistic meant something different depending on who you were and what you looked like. He had been, from the time he was 15, interested in exactly one thing: service. Not in a flag-waving, poster-on-the-wall way, more in the way you're interested in something when it's the only path you can see that leads somewhere you actually want to go. He had joined the reserves at 17. He had applied to the Canadian Forces at 19. He had spent 4 years in the infantry before being selected for assessment, and another 18 months after that before he could talk about where he worked. He didn't talk about it much. He didn't see the point. He went where they sent him. He did what the job required. He came back. He was in 2024, between postings. He'd been given leave to deal with a family matter. His father had had a surgery in Ottawa that had taken a bad turn, recovered, and was now in a rehabilitation center 3 hours from where the rest of the family was. Sebastien had spent the last 4 weeks driving back and forth between Timmins and Ottawa more times than he could count, sleeping in hospitals and truck stop parking lots, eating whatever was available, living out of a single bag. He kept the documents in the safe because he'd learned, a long time ago, that paperwork was the kind of thing you didn't leave loose in the cab of a truck. He had not expected to need them tonight. Hollis put the flashlight in his belt. He crossed his arms, then he uncrossed them. "JTF2, he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, he stopped, started again. "You're active?" "I'm on personal leave." There was a pause. Hollis began. "You told me," Sebastian said, "that your K9 unit indicated on my vehicle." Hollis said nothing. "There is no dog," Sebastian said. "There is no second unit. I've been in this lot for 6 minutes. I came here for coffee." He let that sit for a second. "So I'd like to understand the reason for this stop." Another cruiser pulled into the lot then. It came in slowly, no lights. A second officer got out, a woman, shorter, maybe late 30s, with a braided ponytail and a look on her face that suggested she had driven over here for a specific reason. Constable Resnata Foray had been on dispatch when the call came through. Hollis had put in a request for backup as a formality. She had not expected to arrive to this. She looked at Sebastian. She looked at the open safe. She looked at Hollis. "Drew," she said. He didn't answer her. She walked to the back of the truck. She looked at the credential wallet, the ID card, the service medals. She read the name. She looked at Sebastian. "I apologize for the inconvenience," she said. Sebastian looked at her. Something in his face, which had been completely still for the last 12 minutes, shifted just slightly. "Thank you," he said. Inside the Tim Hortons, the teenager behind the counter had pulled out his phone and was texting someone. He hadn't filmed anything. He had been close enough to hear some of it. The part he kept coming back to, over the next few days, When he told the story to people at school and to his mother, when she asked why he'd come home from his shift looking strange, was the part where the man in the gray hoodie just stood there, didn't get loud, didn't run, didn't fall apart, just stood there, in the rain, with both hands at his sides, and answered every question like he had all the time in the world. That, the teenager thought, was something. Constable Renata Foray filed her supplementary report the next morning. She had been thinking about what to write for most of the drive home, and then, for several hours after, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she kept forgetting to drink. The stop had been initiated without documented grounds. The claim of a K9 indication was unsupported. There was no dog on scene, no log of a K9 unit deployment, no corroborating record of any kind. The subject had been cooperative throughout. The search of the vehicle had been conducted without consent and without a warrant. The subject had been a federally credentialed special operations officer on approved personal leave, in possession of valid identification, who had been stopped while purchasing coffee at a highway service stop. She wrote it all down. She didn't soften it. She didn't add a paragraph of context at the end to make Hollis look better than the situation warranted. She submitted it at 7:42 in the morning. By noon, it was in front of the staff sergeant. By the following Tuesday, it was in front of the professional standards unit. She had not spoken to Hollis since the parking lot. She had thought about it. She had picked up her phone twice. Both times, she'd put it back down. There was nothing to say that the report didn't already say. The staff sergeant's name was Belanger. He had been on the force for 23 years, and he had seen, in that time, a range of things that people had tried to hide inside reports, and a range of things that reports had tried to hide about people. He read Foray's supplementary 3 times. Then he pulled Hollis's dashcam footage. The footage was clear. No K9 unit, no second vehicle, no indication of any kind that would have supported reasonable grounds. What it showed instead was a man parking in a lot, going inside Foth Coffee, returning to his vehicle, and being approached by an officer within 30 seconds of returning. Belanger watched it twice. Then he set it aside. The situation was not complicated as situations went. It was, in fact, one of the least complicated situations he had dealt with in recent memory, which in some ways made it worse. He picked up the phone and called the professional standards unit himself. Sebastian found out about the report from Foray. She had gotten his number from the incident file and called him 4 days after the stop. She didn't spend a lot of time on preamble. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that I filed a supplementary. It's with PSU." There was a pause. Sebastian was in the parking lot of the rehab center, eating a sandwich out of the truck. "I appreciate that," he said. "I should have said something sooner, in the moment. I'm sorry I didn't." He thought about that. "You came to the lot," he said. "You read the scene. You didn't make it worse. That's a low bar." "It is," he agreed. "But I've seen people not clear it." Another pause. Outside the truck, a couple of pigeons were having a territorial dispute over a piece of something on the pavement. He watched them while he thought about what to say. "My father's doing better," he said. "That's what I was in town for." "I'm glad," she said, and it sounded like she meant it. "How long have you been on the job?" he asked. 12 years. "Is it worth it?" He asked it like he was genuinely curious, like he hadn't thought about this question himself. There was a silence on her end that stretched out long enough that he wondered if the call had dropped. "Most days," she said finally. "The days it isn't, you write the report anyway." He ate the last of the sandwich. He folded the wrapper and put it on the dash. "That's a good answer," he said. Hollis was placed on administrative duties pending the professional standards review. He was not suspended, not yet, but he was moved off patrol, taken off the road, given a desk and a stack of files that needed cross-referencing, and told to get on with it. He did not take it well, and then he did not take it poorly either. And eventually he settled into a kind of flat, gray acceptance that the people around him found harder to be around than either of the other options would have been. He went home every night. He ate dinner. He didn't talk to his wife about it, not in any real way. He said it was under review and that he couldn't discuss it. She said she understood. She did not push. What he thought about at night was the safe, specifically what it had felt like to look at what was inside it. Not embarrassment, exactly, though there was that too. Something older and smaller than embarrassment. Something closer to the feeling you get when you've been certain about something for a long time, and then you discover, quietly and without any drama, that you were wrong. He had looked at that truck, and he had seen a story. He had been so sure about the story, He hadn't asked himself, not once in the 45 minutes before he pulled into that lot, whether the story was real. That was what kept him up. Not the report, not the review, not what was going to happen to his record or his career or anything else that could be measured. The story. How quickly he had believed it. How thoroughly. How completely invisible his certainty had been to him until the safe opened and everything fell out of it. The PSU review took 6 weeks. Hollis received a formal reprimand and a mandatory retraining order covering use of force justification, search and seizure grounds, and documentation of canine deployment. The reprimand would remain on his file for 3 years. He was returned to patrol duties after 60 days on administrative assignment. He did not appeal. Foray's supplementary report was noted in the review summary as having been exemplary in its completeness and timeliness. No formal commendation was issued because commendations for doing what you were supposed to do were not standard practice. But Belanger told her directly, in a brief hallway conversation that lasted under 2 minutes, that she had done the right thing. She said thank you and meant it and didn't think about it much after that. You wrote the report. That was the job. Sebastian's father was discharged from the rehab center on a Tuesday in October, 42 days after the surgery. He was walking with a cane. He was irritable about the cane and said so. He insisted on carrying his own bag from the room to the car, which the nurses permitted because they had known since day 2 that he was going to insist on this regardless of what they said. Sebastian drove him home. His father sat in the passenger seat of the Silverado and looked out the window for most of the drive. He was not a man who talked easily, and Sebastian had gotten that from him, the same way he'd gotten the shape of his hands and the habit of arriving early. About an hour outside of Timmins, his father said, "Something happened on one of your drives down?" Sebastian glanced at him. "Your mother said you seemed different when you came in the last few times." "Quieter. I'm always quiet. Quieter than that." Sebastian looked at the road. A transport truck passed them going the other direction. The sky to the north was that particular shade of dark gray that meant snow was coming, maybe 2 days out. "I got stopped," he said, "in Sudbury, a few weeks ago." His father didn't say anything. He waited. "It was nothing," Sebastian said. "It was handled." His father looked at him for a long moment. "You all right?" Sebastian thought about the parking lot, the rain, the flashlight in his eyes, the sound of the safe latch opening, the way Hollis had stood there with his arms at his sides and nothing on his face, the way Foray had walked up, read the whole scene in about 10 seconds, and said, "I apologize for the inconvenience," like those were exactly the right words. "Yeah," he said. "I'm all right." His father nodded. He looked back out the window. They drove the rest of the way in the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. There's a version of this story where the safe is never opened, where Sebastian doesn't have the documents with him, or has them but not in that form, just loose papers in a folder, easy to dismiss, where Hollis's word is the only word in the parking lot and Foray never shows up at all. That version exists. It happens, somewhere, on a different night, to a different man who also drove a long distance to sit with a sick parent. That man didn't have a credential wallet or a service medal or a government-issue identification card. He had a coffee and a cracked window and nothing else, and the story that Hollis decided to tell about him was the only story anyone wrote down. That's the version worth thinking about. Not the safe, not what was in it, not even the review or the reprimand or any of the official machinery that ground into motion once Foray submitted her report. Just the fact that Sebastian Ouellet came home. From overseas, from years of doing something most people will never be asked to do, and sat down in a parking lot in Sudbury at midnight to finish a muffin before driving to see his father, and the first question anyone asked him was whether he'd done something wrong. He hadn't. He never had. But he spent 47 minutes in the rain proving it, and somewhere tonight, someone else is in that same parking lot, in that same rain, without a safe. Think about them.